Hi, my name's Lana Miller. I'm a stewardship consultant with Everance. Everance is an organization that helps people think about how they integrate their faith and values with their finances and their money. And as a stewardship consultant, it's really just kind of a fancy way of saying that I help people think about, provide educational resources and other things to help people think about what that really looks like in their lives. So today and throughout this week, we're going to have some time together to think about what is stewardship? What is generosity? What is abundance, scarcity? What does that look like? And as we prepare for Thanksgiving and the coming Christmas holiday, I think it helps us to put some things in perspective. Maybe it might shift what we think. This morning, I'd invite you to just join with me in a story from Exodus 16. For some of you, this is a story you're going to know. It may be fairly familiar. You may want to close your eyes. You may want to also follow along in the pictures that I have for you as I'm reading the story, and maybe allow the pictures to take you in to a different kinds of place or space as I'm reading. But I'd invite you to try to think of yourself as part of the story. What would you be thinking? What would you be feeling? What are some of the ideas and thoughts that may come into your mind? So listen to the story and come into the story with me. This story in Exodus 16 begins with a people of Israel who had just come out of slavery in Egypt. For 2.5 months, they had been traipsing around the wilderness. Listen to the story. The whole group of Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said, "If only we had died at the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. At least there we had our fill of bread. But you've brought us into this wilderness to kill us. You've brought us, this whole assembly, to starve." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you. And each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way, I will test them, whether they will follow my instructions or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites in the evening, "You shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning, you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining. For who are we that you complain against us? When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, it's because he's heard your complaining and you're uttering against him. What are we? Your complaining is not against us, but it's against God." In the evening, the quails came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there, on the surface of the wilderness, was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is that?" They didn't know what it was. And Moses said, "It's the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord commanded. Gather as much of it as you need, an omer to a person, according to the number of persons, all providing for those under your own tents." The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some gathering less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning." But they didn't listen to Moses. Some let part of it until morning, and it bred worms and became foul. Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning, they gathered it, as much as they needed. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much food as they needed. The people came to Moses and said, "What is going on?" Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of rest, a day of Sabbath. So boil what you need today, and put aside what's left over till morning." And so they did. It didn't become foul. There were no worms in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is Sabbath. Today you shall not find it in the field. 6 days you go to gather, but on the seventh there will be none." On the seventh day, some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you food for 2 days. Each of you stay where you are. Don't leave your place on the seventh." And so the people rested on the seventh day. Where did you find yourself in this story? Have you ever grumbled or complained at God? How have you experienced God providing for your needs? When have you not been satisfied with God and perhaps taken things into your own hands? What do you think it would be like if you were only able to take what you needed from day to day? In taking only what they needed, it's interesting. There was enough, more than enough for everyone. But over and over again, these Israelites, they didn't trust God. They wanted to take things in their own hands, and they wanted to get more than their share. Interesting, huh? I compare this in some ways to when we lived in Southeast Asia. We lived there for about 5 years, and each morning, our house helper would go and get what we needed for the day. In fact, that's what everyone did. We didn't have enough refrigeration or freezer space or shelf space to keep more than what we needed. And so each day, you took what you needed for the next. But here, moving back to the US, I take more than what I need for each day. In fact, I go to the store maybe once or twice every other week. So I have a big refrigerator. I have a big freezer. I have lots of cabinet space. I store up a lot more than what I need. Interesting. Throughout the Old Testament, God reminds the people to take what they need, that what they have is enough, that God will provide for their needs. But the people build idols. They demand kings. They worship other gods. They try to extort others for money and land and wealth. They fail to take care of their neighbors, the most vulnerable and marginalized, the orphans, the widows, the immigrants. Instead of living in contentment, they live wanting more than what they need. And God has to remind them over and over and over again to only take what they need, that what they have, God has given them, and to not forget. God will provide them with what they need. It's enough. One of my favorite passages is actually just a few books over in Deuteronomy 6, verse 10. It says, "When the Lord your God has brought you into the land that he swore your ancestors," so after you have wandered in this wilderness and you've gotten to this promised land, when God has brought you there, God will give you a land with fine, large cities that you did not build. houses filled with all sorts of goods that you did not fill, hewn cisterns that you did not hew, vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. And when you have eaten your fill, take care that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. This story of wanting more than our share, of wanting more than what God has said is enough, taking things into our own hands, isn't a story just in the Old Testament. It goes throughout the Bible. It's continued throughout all of history. And as we look into next week and celebrating Thanksgiving, it's very evident as part of the Thanksgiving story. This story of the Israelites is a story that we find ourselves in as well. Growing up, most of us were taught that Thanksgiving, it represented a time when the Pilgrims and the Native Americans celebrated together and gave thanks. For many of the colonists, they had traveled on the Mayflower for 66 treacherous and uncomfortable days. They remained on board the ship throughout the first brutal winter, over half of them dying, women and children mostly. In the spring, they received a visit from several Native Americans, among them Squanto, who taught the Pilgrims how to survive. The first Thanksgiving, as we're taught, was a celebration of the first harvest. But this story of Thanksgiving and colonists isn't the same story that Native Americans tell. In fact, the Pilgrims came seeking freedom to practice their faith, but they also came at the promise of prosperity, land ownership in the New World. Instead of living in harmony with Native peoples, they soon drove out, and I quote, the merciless and savage Indians from their land. They didn't live in peace, but brutally killed and massacred tens of thousands of Native peoples. Why? I can only imagine that one reason was because they were scared. They were fearful that they wouldn't have enough, that there wasn't enough for everyone. So they decided to fight, to take what they wanted. Their fear led them to take things into their own hands, to eliminate their competition. Instead of a world where there was enough for all to thrive and to survive, they wanted more than their share. This is the story in the Old Testament. People wanting more than their share, and God reminding them over and over, you have enough. I will provide. This fear leads them to discontent. Their discontentedness leads them out of relationship with God and with one another. So I wonder, what keeps you from being content? How might you practice contentedness? Perhaps one way is to start with gratitude, noticing and appreciating what you're thankful for each and every day. At the end of each day, with my children, we say a prayer. God, thank you for the people we meet. Thank you for the friends we greet, the food we eat. Thank you for this day, and thank you for, and we leave it blank. And we fill in with the things that we're thankful for. And to be honest, it's not always easy to think about those specific things in our day that we're grateful for. But we try, and it's a reminder. There's a Tibetan tradition, in some ways, kind of similar. At the end of each day, there's a cup beside their bed, and they turn the cup over, recognizing that life for today has ended. In the morning, they turn the cup right side up, thankful for a new day, for life, for being able to see and feel, for being able to live another day. Gratitude is one practice of contentment. I wonder, how might you practice contentment? Sometimes it helps to look at a definition, and so I've put one here for you to pay attention to. What is contentment? In the Greek New Testament, it's defined like this: to be free from care, because one is at peace with who they are, what they have, and at peace with their place in God's love. You see, contentment is both a gift from God and it's also a practice, something we need to continue to practice, to learn. So what keeps you being content? What are the ways that you're recognizing what enough is? I've put together a few questions for you to consider in the next few minutes, maybe by yourself, maybe as a small group. But I invite you just to take a few minutes to look over these questions. It's interesting, in the Old Testament story that I read for you, God had a way of putting limits, not allowing the people to take more than their share. So what are the ways that you might practice self-control? Put limits on yourself. Take only what you need. As we think about Thanksgiving and even perhaps Christmas as times to be overindulgent, what would it look like to only take our share? What would it take for you to be content? To be at peace with yourself? To be at peace with what you have? To be at peace with God? What might help you to foster contentment? What keeps you from being content? What might you do to practice gratitude over this next week? I gave you some examples, but there's lots of things that you can do. Writing notes, smiling, talking to people, sharing appreciation. The list could go on. I'd invite you to take a few moments to reflect on these questions or maybe something else that came out of this conversation the last few minutes. I look forward to continuing conversation with you throughout this week as we think about what it looks like to have enough. In fact, to live in the more than enough, recognizing that God provides for all that we need. Have a good day.